I feel like I am particularly gifted chiming in on this problem since we are talking about my main character for today. We are talking about Resto Shaman, and we are talking about what has been added, sneakily added, without too much of an announcement from Blizzard from the official patch notes of 11.0.5. Now, we have mentioned multiple times the changes coming in 11.0.5, talking about the balance tuning that will happen, what will change the most out of the specs, what we can expect in terms of changes. However, there was an extra sneaky addition on top of what we already know about, and this was the change to Poison Cleansing Totem, which is now going to have a 2-minute cooldown instead of a 45-second cooldown. Now, the power of this totem went into overdrive last reset once we were first introduced to the Xal'atath's Bargain Devour. This was the weekly affix which would put a debuff on the entire party that you needed to be healing through or dispelling in any way you could. And well, turns out any dispel worked. Poison Cleansing Totem is a poison dispel, so the mechanic was basically becoming negated completely by the totem. And because this bargain mechanic happens every minute, the totem has less than a 1-minute cooldown, you very simply just drop the totem every time this mechanic comes and the mechanic disappears. That's what the 90 plus, 95% plus of the community in Mythic Plus noticed in that particular week. Now, there are a few problems though with this change. Change number one is, of course, that this is completely irrelevant for the high keys. And the deeper we go into the season, the earlier the fact that this doesn't matter will happen. Because last week we were talking about high keys and we were talking about 12s. This week we're already talking about 14s. In a few weeks the high keys will be probably 16 or 17. So by then, by that point, doing a 12 will be much easier than it is now. So the point in your Mythic Plus keys in which the Poison Cleansing Totem loses a lot of value because at 12 keys or higher you no longer have the Xal'atath's Bargain mechanic will happen sooner and sooner. Then there is also the other point, which is the fact that these bargains rotate each week. So even if this totem was good, it was only going to be good once per month, once every 4 resets of Mythic Plus affixes. And even then it still wouldn't have been useful for this affix in the 12 keys or higher. This is somewhat of a problem, not because there are players trying to say that Resto Shaman right now isn't the dominating healer in Mythic Plus, right? Because they are at the moment, but rather because we have seen this kind of treatment before, right? We don't even have to go too far back to remember what happened to Priest. We have to go back to Dragonflight and what happened with the nerfs given to Priest. At the time, the meta spec that was the mainstay in Mythic Plus was Shadow Priest. And many of the complaints at the time was the usefulness of Mind Soothe to allow you certain skips, because at the time Rogue was not particularly meta in Mythic Plus, which meant you did not really have an easy access to Shroud. You could have a couple of close to each other skips with Mind Soothe, so you couldn't even fix this problem with invisibility potions. And then on top of that you had Mass Dispel. You had a few dangerous mechanics, either dispelling enemies or dispelling yourself, that could be solved very simply with Mass Dispel. Now Blizzard again fixed that problem very simply by nerfing Mass Dispel up to a 2-minute cooldown. And they also gave a similar nerf treatment to Mind Soothe. Now Mind Soothe was no longer going to work on enemies with stealth detection, just like an invisibility potion or a shroud don't work on an enemy with stealth detection. Now that was deemed a somewhat of an overhanded nerf because it's not that Mass Dispel was that strong. It's not that for the years before, where Mass Dispel was on a much shorter cooldown, it had been a major issue that made Shadow Priest or Priest in general a meta pick in Mythic Plus because of Mass Dispel. For example, even going the expansion prior to that, Priest was meta with Holy. For the last 2 seasons of Shadowlands, Holy Priest, Kyrian Holy Priest, was the meta healer, and Mass Dispel was not an actual relevant part of the reason why Priest was meta in Shadowlands. And now, guess what? We are in the War Within. Is Master Spell that powerful? Would it become broken if it had a 20-second cooldown, for example, in the War Within, instead of having a 2-minute cooldown? No, of course not. It wouldn't really become some ridiculously powerful tool in Mythic Plus. So you look back at when it was nerfed and you wonder if there was a need to nerf it that hard or in that way. Now, Poison Cleansing Totem is getting basically the same treatment. It's being nerfed up to 2 minutes in terms of cooldown. Here's the issue. Issue number one, as we mentioned, the biggest effect you can find for this Poison Cleansing Totem was to the affix, to the Devour Xal'atath's Bargain, which, as we pointed out, goes away as soon as you enter a +12. And the deeper you go into the season, the more and more players will be at a 12 key level or above. So more and more players will not even have to deal with this affix anymore. So what leaves this Poison Cleansing Totem to be useful for are only the specific actual poison casts, poison dots or debuffs that the mobs in the dungeons are placing down. But that is also not something very relevant for Poison Cleansing Totem, because the biggest, okay, the more visible effect Poison Cleansing Totem can have right now in Mythic Plus is in Arakara, is in the first segment up to the first boss of Arakara, and then specifically the last boss of Arakara. Now, for the first segment of Thrash up to the first boss, this nerf is not even that hurtful, because in the size of the pulls you're doing up to the first boss, Before this nerf, you could simply Poison Cleansing Totem every pack. The way you would do it now is to Poison Cleansing Totem on pull, wait a couple of minutes missing the second pack you're pulling, and then use Poison Cleansing Totem, use Totemic Recall to get the cooldown back, and then use Poison Cleansing Totem again in the last pack, where you would be getting these poison dots. So even with this nerf, you would be effectively only missing one set of poison dispels with this totem. Then you have the last boss, which would work in, again, a similar way. You would use the totem on the first set of poisons to use Totemic Recall, and then use the poison totem again on the second one, use your cooldowns for the third and fourth set of poisons, and by then the totem will be off cooldown again. And we're still only talking about one dungeon, and in this case one boss in one dungeon. Most of the other dungeons don't really have much of any dangerous poisons that require a dispel, and even less a totem because of an AoE sets of poisons, which will only happen in Arakara. And then you have the second issue, which could be the next season. Once we enter the next season and Arakara rotates out of the dungeon pool, for example, then you don't even have that many relevant poisons to dispel anymore. Yeah, maybe we will have some older dungeons introduced into the pool with a large amount of poisons to be dispelled, but that's unlikely. So you would be entering the next season with a much more useless Poison Cleansing Totem. So then, much like we did with Priest, you would be looking back at the change and wonder, was this necessary? You know, now this totem is much less useful than it was before, and it's not that it was very powerful. It was made powerful by an affix created by Blizzard, which was basically one of the only few affixes that could make this totem powerful, and then it was nerfed because of it. And the next season, this power will likely go away, even more likely perhaps if Blizzard changes the different types of bargains we can get. Maybe we even lose this Devour bargain that makes this totem powerful. This is a very familiar kind of discussion that players have seen and heard of whenever a particular spec becomes meta. Sometimes it was Holy Paladin when it came to healers, it was Priest before Paladin. We have seen that for Augmentation Evoker, although they are kind of a unique case. But very often the situation is that a certain spec is completely forgotten, nobody has anything bad to complain about the power of the spec, and then the spec becomes meta, and suddenly everyone realizes, everyone begins to believe that Blessing of Protection, Blessing of Sacrifice, Lay on Hands, Blessing of Freedom are problematic and they are too powerful, even though those things had been in the game for several years and the Paladin had not been meta for several years. Suddenly they have become now a problem in the meta. We have seen that for Paladin, we have seen that for Priest, now we are seeing it for Shaman. This was definitely not the right kind of nerf to give to Shaman. You can be in agreement with the fact that the spec needs to be nerfed in some way, in some of the utility they might bring, for example. You can, though, disagree in the way this nerf is being delivered. Many players often point out to the possible solution of not even nerfing the spec but buffing the other specs. In the case of a healer, one of the often requested enough type of changes would be, for example, to give all of the healers the same type of dispel, or perhaps to give all of the healers an equal and fair kind of interrupt, so they would all have the same ability to help the group stopping the casts. Another one would be to add the same amount of AoE crowd control of Resto Shaman. At the moment, Shaman, for example, has the Cap Totem plus the Knockup. The Cap Totem can go down to like 35-second cooldown. The Knockup has a 25-second cooldown. This is far better, for example, than the 2-minute cooldown AoE Disorient of a Paladin, or the 30-second cooldown Fear of a Priest, or the similar Disorient of the Incap Roar of a Druid. So simply raising the amount of AoE stop that you can give to other healers, for example, without directly nerfing Shaman. You would be indirectly nerfing Shaman by giving the other healers more options, for example. But again, if we had to go through and look at the kinds of nerfs to weaken the power of Shaman for the season, adding a 2-minute cooldown to something as niche and situational as a Poison Cleansing Totem is definitely not the right kind of nerf. And it doesn't feel right because we already have previous experience with this exact kind of nerf, which was the increasing the cooldown of Mass Dispel up to 2 minutes because it was too powerful for a few packs of a few pools of one season of Mythic Plus. That is basically kind of the same treatment we have seen now to Poison Cleansing Totem. That is the issue we have come to discuss for today. The fact that even though we might be agreeing we need some ways to either nerf Resto Shaman in Mythic Plus or make the other healers more powerful, this one was not it. The nerf to Poison Cleansing Totem was not really going to fix too many of the advantages of Resto Shaman or alleviate some of the frustrations the other healers currently have in Mythic Plus. So, for today, on this Sunday, we have to finish the day, I'm afraid, with an L when it comes to the balance tuning of Blizzard. So, we are now, with this done, leaving each other on this weekend. Thanks, of course, as usual, for having watched the video, together with, of course, supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching, see you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, it always feels weird to wake up in the morning. It's like I am 20 years older than I'm supposed to be.